on average, people are losing like 15 minutes per switching of tasks.
Show up to these conversations prepared.
And then there's the mental piece.
You're there as a value add, not a value drain. What's up, Zach? I feel like we're chatting in the dark a little bit here.
A little
Like,
bit.
the lights are out, but I will say that you are home. Like, you look very alert. So, first of all, for those of us those are the guys who are watching us on YouTube, what's going on with your office? Explain.
So the scary part is we're selling this house. We're closing in a week and a half, and
Oh,
about
wow.
a year ago, I put a space heater on in here, and then the electricity went out in the room. I went to go check the breaker, and then I didn't want to reset my wife's computer. There's nothing that's off right now, so we got some tomfoolery to do with the electricity to figure out why the electricity went out in my office. So the light that you see right now is I have a giant white screen on my laptop in front of me to get to illuminate my face.
I feel like it's we're like little kids almost. You're over for a sleep. We'll be like, "Hey, man, don't talk too loud. My mom will come in here pissed." But man, it's good to have you here, and we're gonna be talking about something I think that's really fascinating, and I think that's really on the minds of women,
Mhm.
really on the minds of men, but not on our radar. And but I would love for you to first of all share with us what exactly do you do, and how did you even get involved with this?
Sure. So as I say in many of my videos, hi, my name's Zach. I'm your mental load coach. And then I say hi, Zach, to myself. Um, I help teach men to better understand the mental load and invisible labor that their partners are doing in their marriage. I do corporate workshops. I work with couples, but mostly men to understand these things. Most people have seen my face on Instagram. I have somewhere around, I think it's 120 million views in the past 3 years, mostly talking about mental and invisible labor on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube. The way that I usually go about explaining it is talking about, I think we all have mental load. We all do cognitive labor. We all do invisible labor. The loudest of the invisible labor, I think, is the domestic work that a lot of our wives talk about and pull their hair out over. And I think a lot of us men in the patriarchy that we've grown up in have been taught to not value that. And I think, you can look at a lot of socioeconomic situations and governments and how a lot of things are structured so that we continue to not value a lot of that invisible labor.
I think what you'll have to do is I would really love for you to back up a little bit and talk to us more about specifically what invisible labor is. And by the way, can I tell you a secret? Okay, I'm whispering. I really, really want to know what you're going to talk about because it's probably really going to help my marriage a ton. I think my
So
wife thinks I might know, but I really don't know as well as I should. All
I got you, Larry.
right, cool, cool.
So what I usually talk about when it comes to invisible labor is sort of three different main layers. So you have the domestic labor, which is typically the physical stuff. It's the really obvious of the, laundry, the dishwashing, the vacuuming, the sweeping, down to the minute of the putting the shoes back on the little rack next to the door. It's the cleaning up our beard shavings when we're shaving. It is the picking up socks off the floor, putting them into the rubbish. It's the when you're flossing and you get that little bit that gets stuck on the mirror. It's cleaning that off. It's, when you leave some streaks in the toilet, it's pulling out the toilet brush and making sure the next user doesn't see that. So there's the physical ones that you have that like visual
Yeah.
feedback. You could catch it on a camera, like you can see it. Um, a lot of those we would call invisible, I think, because I'm sure everyone's seen at least one of those trends where why is marriage hard? And then you see, someone closing a cabinet door or putting a shoe back where it belongs. Um, and then there's the mental piece. And I think this is what a lot of white collar work is. So when you think about, I was a salesperson. A huge part of what I was doing was sending emails. It was figuring out who to talk to next. It was doing research. When I was a math teacher, it was figuring out how I need to adjust my next lesson plan to fit the student's needs. I think a similar viral trend of mom math was, okay, I need to be to this place by 8 o'clock, so we need to leave by 7:45. So the kids need to be fed by 7:15, which means they need to turn the TV off by 7:10, which means that we need to have gotten home by 7 o'clock. So it's like all that thinking, all that cognitive labor, we call that the mental load. And I think you and I are both business owners. I think I was trying to figure out earlier, like I have ADHD, and for people listening, I'm just showing my little notepad here as I sat down half an hour before we had this podcast. I'm like, okay, what do I need to hammer out the next 30 minutes? And I go to click an email to respond to that, and then I end up in five different places. And I was like, oh my God, I 15 minutes have just gone by and I still haven't done anything. And so writing down one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight different things for my webinar that I'm doing tomorrow, to get the message out about it and to get people to show up. Mental load is the left brain thinking. It's the thing we go to college for. It's those skills that arguably pay significantly higher than a lot of the physical stuff, more of blue collar jobs. And then there's the third layer, which is emotional labor. So that's what a therapist does. They listen to you, they're caring about your feelings, they're empathizing with you, they're validating you. It's what C-suite people do. It's the thinking about the long-term aspect of things, thinking, okay, I need to deliver a really challenging message to my CMO, and I'm going to adjust the way that I say it because I know that that might hurt their feelings a little bit. Even at the beginning of this, Larry, you asked me, are there any subjects we need to stay away from? That was doing emotional labor for me. I was pointing out a vulnerability, which you had said, hey man, what are your qualifications? And the way you asked it, like the tone that you delivered it in, the concern and empathy for my reception of that question, I think you had said, hey, like don't take offense to this or something. Like that's emotional labor. So emotional labor is the adjustment of our tone. It's the adjustment of how we think about someone else's feelings or emotions as we're delivering something. So those like the first three places that I start when it comes to invisible labor. Those are the three, I think, main categories. You can go off into deeper categories, but I think first just being able to come up with language to describe things that we're all doing some version of it on any given day. Even if you're walking on eggshells around your partner, I would call that emotional labor, is you don't want to piss them off. And so you're being really careful of what you're saying around them. That is also emotional labor.
And then can you give us examples of the other? I mean, the one I have, Zach, I have four boys.
Mhm,
So like my toilets are full of streaks and clogs and unflushed toilets. And
mhm,
dude, my poor wife is just surrounded by chaos. Like it's Animal House here. So the invisible labor is very visible to all of
mhm.
us, right? And part of my job is that I want to point out I want to make these young men very aware of like, yeah, actually, you want to hear kind of a funny story with this.
Yeah.
Um, and to be honest, I would love your take on this. Just the conversation in general. So you have a 3 and 3/4,
Three and a quarter. Yeah.
3 and a quarter, 3 and a quarter. So yeah, by the way, guys, me and Zach were kind of joking where I was like, hey, like, how old's your kid? He's like 3 and a quarter. I was 3 and a quarter. Okay. And like, I noticed if you guys go to his Instagram, he's got 500,000 followers on Instagram. I was like, dude, how'd you do this? He's like, I upload 1.3 videos per day. I'm like, what? 1.3, like, it's just, I love it. Like, but that's the engineer, the mathematician in you and all that stuff turned invisible labor genius. Right. But,
I'll
um,
give you one really
yeah,
quick math one.
let's hear it.
What I believe that there is a single number that's the most under known number, like we all know 365 days are in a year. Um, how many hours are in a week? What?
168.
Ah, very good. You are one of the few people that actually knows the answer to that. 24 times 7. I think that's the most underknown number in our society.
Yeah, well, it's the reason I know that is because this is when I give guys tough love. Like, and
Mm,
so like I'll get emails be like, hey man, like I want to join the alliance, which is our mastermind. Like I want, it's like I just don't have the time. And I was like, you don't have the time? There's 168 hours in a week. It's
yep.
0.5%. That's not even 1% of your time. You don't have an hour. If you don't have an hour, we got bigger problems, man.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay, good point. So like, but I used to use that all the time too. Like, I don't have time. And I'm like, no, 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 I'm not making the time is what it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that. But um, okay. So here's the story.
Mhm.
And I would, to be honest, I would really love your advice on how I could make this conversation better because I stumbled on it. Right. And so my 18-year-old, my 16-year-old, they have their own bathroom downstairs. They're down there, and
Mhm.
like, dude, I don't even like to piss in their bathroom. And I'm a dude. Like I'll piss anywhere. I'll piss outside or whatever. But like seriously, like I lifted up the kid's toilet the other day to take a piss, and I saw something like on the rim, and I was like, I don't even know what that is. Like I don't know what that is. And I told both my boys, I'm like, listen, there's something on the rim of your toilet and it's unidentifiable to me. You might want to go check that out. I have no idea what it is. It could be a booger, it could be something really gross, but it wasn't a color I recognized, and it certainly shouldn't have come out of a human being. You might want to go look at that. But yeah, so you're one who's three and a quarter. You got lots of really fun conversations to look forward to. But anyway, so here's what happened. My the bathroom downstairs, like there's this tiny little trash can, and it's full, and like it's so full that my kids strategically started stacking like their empty boxes of like toothpaste and like their like all this stuff, like their mouthwash box that the bottle came in, like that's sort of stacked neatly around the
Mhm.
trash can. And dude, I'm very keen on this conversation we're gonna have today because my wife is very attuned to what the visible labor is and what she thinks might be invisible to us, right?
Mhm.
So like I told my boys, I'm like, hey, I was like, you guys might want to take your trash out, and they're like, yeah, we're going to, this weekend. I was like, nah, you might want to like do it now, and they're like, why? And I was like, well, I was like, your mom walks past that bathroom all the time, and I was like, and mom notices a lot of things that might be on your radar for a later date, but there are ultimately on her radar like right now, and they tend to stress her out. And
Mhm.
they're like, it's not that big of a deal. It's only the trash. I was like, and then we kind of went back and forth. But basically, here's what I told them. I was like, I need to tell you guys it's not about the trash. It's about you being aware of the trash and about you taking action because you are aware and knowing that there's other people in this house besides you that don't want to look at your trash for the next 5 days until you get around to it when it only takes you about 20 seconds to empty it. So it's really not about the trash. It's about you being aware of the trash and taking action on it. Now, I could have probably butchered that, but I was like, how do I explain to these boys that this is a real thing and it goes well beyond just emptying a can? It's more. But in your opinion, feel free to beat that up, make it better. Like, I just want to know, what do you think?
No, I mean, I think that was a pretty good, clear messaging to them. I, as previously being a 16-year-old boy that and living in what felt like a frat house, even though, it was just four of us guys living in a two-bedroom in college, that we did not clean things. I think some context that they might be missing. Did either of them have girlfriends?
They both do, actually.
Have the girlfriends seen this bathroom?
So it magically it magically gets spotless right before they come over.
Yep.
I don't know how it happens, but I think it's like the bathroom fairies get in there and just do their thing. Yeah.
So, what I might invite them to look at is why do you do the why do you do the labor of cleaning it right before your girlfriend comes? And I think if you can help extract the reasoning that they have underneath that, I'm imagining their answer might be, oh, well, we want it to be like a nice space for them to enjoy, and or we don't want to look like slobs to them, something like that. And I think, furthermore, you could say like, okay, well, what would your girlfriends think of you, or how would they feel valued if they did come and it was like this? Um, and they might say, oh, well, we would never let that happen, or they might say, they might feel like they're not valued, or that like they're not worth having a clean bathroom. And you might be able to catch them in the spot, like, have you considered that maybe that's how your mom and I think, is that we don't feel valued in this home, or that you're willing to put in the emotional labor for a romantic partner, but you're not willing to do the emotional labor for your parents or for your mom that's going to love you unconditionally. But you'll do it for the girls that love you conditionally, or like you conditionally. So that might be an angle to go. I can't say that I've done a ton of work with teenage boys around this specific topic. Of sold them on math for 8 years, but not so much domestic labor. Um, but that might be one angle I would go if you haven't gone that specific route. But I think you said it really well. And I think, one of the part of the reason that we're moving houses is, so this is a four bedroom house, 3 acres. So it's a lot of maintenance. And
Dang.
we're moving back into our three family house, two towns away. It's a 2 bedroom apartment on the bottom floor. And one of the things we recognized was that consistently my wife Alyssa was saying, like, hey, can we buy this? Can we do this? Can we fix this? And oftentimes I was either saying, like, do we have to? Like, that doesn't matter to me. One of the things was like, when people come to our house, right? I'm proud that we even have a house, like that
Yeah,
we
yeah.
have this giant place. We had goats in the backyard. And it was
You
like,
have
it's like
goats in the backyard?
we did. We had to bring them back to MSPCA because we don't have a home for them once we move. But yeah, we had three goats and for the past 2 years. Um, but one of the interesting things that came up, just like I think it was 2 months ago, was I said, when people come up our driveway, what do you feel? And she says, I feel shame the fact that we have a bunch of weeds on the side of like the driveway and it's not very well manicured, because she grew up definitely at a house where both of her parents really cared about the landscaping. And I said, well, when people come up the driveway, I feel pride because we have a house. And like I can't believe we even have this place. So there was a moment when, she even called me on my own BS about, like, isn't this what you teach to the men you work with? Which was that she was not feeling valued because I was unwilling to care about something that she clearly cared about. I was unwilling to do the emotional labor of caring about something and putting myself in someone else's shoes, um, rather than having my own like objective concerns be where the buck stops. And so I think a lot of what we do, when we talk about what empathy is, it's seeing from someone else's point of view. If we'll go back to math nerdiness. If we think about what work is, there have been men that have argued with me that um, emotional labor and visible labor, that shouldn't be considered labor, because blue collar work, working with your hands and getting sweaty, that's labor. I would argue, if you think about putting yourself in someone else's shoes, like you're moving from point A to point B, the definition of work is distance times force. So the distance that you're moving, if you have to get yourself into someone else's shoes, that's work.
I think this is a really, really good topic for so many reasons. Um, um, when it comes to our wives, I heard this quote actually from a podcast guest that I interviewed today, but also is released. I think it released actually the same week as yours here,
Mhm.
which is, you know, what a man values and what a man likes to do is he likes to build this sort of wall of protection around his village. And like that's what the
Mhm.
man is focused on, right? It's all these invisible threats, right? Do we have enough money? Is my family protected? Do is there how do I keep them mentally healthy? How do I keep them physically healthy? Like, all of these things to provide and protect and to lead, right? So it's like this building this wall around our family of protection. And our wives are more like they're so like think of it as a village, right? As our family and our home and all that. Our wives, what they like to do is they like to be in the village and to enrich the village and to make it beautiful and warming and comfortable and loving and all this other stuff. And if those things are compromised within the village and she's the only one doing it, then she probably feels pretty slighted.
Mm.
Is that pretty accurate?
Yeah, and I think, the building around the village, I mean, I think that decades and or centuries ago, that was super important. Like
Yeah.
you're living longer by another year or 10 years, like mattered. Like Game of Thrones, like it mattered if you were watching the fences and the outside. And I think we live in a state now where we're much more likely to die from heart disease and all the other things that stress us out more so than exterior like threats. And so I think because we've evolved in our society to that, the we don't have to check the fences nearly as much as we think we do. And I think much more of our partners are looking for someone to co-create that space with. Um, which as you were talking about like how to have that conversation with your boys, and what you are looking forward to within your own marriage, a huge part of what I coach people to do is the fair play method. And that is kind of setting expectations for how much are you looking on the outside of this village versus the inside of this village. um, I'm a so in the it, I don't know if you're familiar with the book Fair Play, but it's written by Eve Rodsky, came out in 2019, New York Times bestseller. There's 100 of us that are trained to implement the Fair Play method as coaches and therapists and stuff. Um, of the 106 of us, I think there's four of us that are men. And I'm currently the only guy that has active programming teaching fair play specifically for men. So just a little FYI of kind of where I come from on teaching this. Um, One of the huge parts of what I'm coaching guys to do is have a consistent conversation with their partner about the home responsibilities in their home. So you as a CEO, right, you're probably having consistent conversations with your team about what the standard operating procedures are. At some point in time, you probably had a conversation about, okay, once we have a podcast guest on, the recording goes here, it goes into this folder. We're going to create X amount of short clips. They should be spaced out this amount. They're going to go on our Instagram accounts and collaborate with the person. We'll use this Google form to get all the information and to sync that up so that you could delegate it so that you weren't doing all that work. Right now, I'm still a solopreneur, so I'm still doing all that work. Um, but at some point, you had that conversation. When are you having those conversations about the domestic labor that happens in your home?
Every Sunday. Well,
Every
for us
Sunday?
anyway. Yeah, we had to learn that the hard way. We call it the huddle, which we get together and we talk about the week ahead, and but also know we also call it the State of the Union, but we also like the huddle because we're kind of a football family.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's where we do that stuff. Before we get into this, can we back up just a minute?
Sure.
I really want to know about this video that went viral where you just kind of like beat yourself up and it got like millions of views. What did you say?
Which one?
I guess the one that you referenced in the beginning.
So that one that I was talking about is the blueberry muffins video, mental load part 110. I'm on part 287, I think now. So
Wait, it's
the
not
reason
287.7?
no, those are integers.
Oh my
Actually,
God,
no,
dude.
I guess they're counting numbers because they don't go negative.
Oh my gosh,
Um,
dude. You were like killing me with these math things. Anyway, go ahead. Just yeah.
so quick context of why I make videos like that. So, uh, a consistent way that I go about making videos is talking about where I am adding extra mental load for my wife, adding domestic labor for my wife, um, I didn't always share my own vulnerabilities or like shortcomings in that area. When I first had our daughter back in 2021, I was generally just sharing like what it was like being a father. And I had my first couple viral videos. One of them hit 5 million. I was just talking about what it was like, um, caring for a child overnight because I had the 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. shift. And every like 90 minutes, she was needing to do bottle feeding. And as I was making my content, and all of a sudden I had all these followers, which are mostly moms and women that were looking for an equal partner. Um, I made a lot of videos that were kind of talking down to other men that were not doing the same work as me. I was pretty egoic, kind of on my high horse, like, I'm awesome. This is what all the idiot dads need to hear. And as time went on, I recognized that I wasn't making the world any better of a place. I was just stroking my ego. And there wasn't actually any, also, there was nothing that I could sell or teach to women. I was validating them that, like, these are the attributes that we're aiming for. But at the same time, there was nothing useful I was bringing to the market. And at some point, I realized in 2023 that um, I wasn't going to try to teach anything to the women because I was just giving words to what they already saw and understood. And so I actually wanted to help out other guys, pretty much myself, but a couple years prior. I remember when my wife brought this conversation to me about improving the equality of our domestic labor. She was really afraid to bring it up. She was scared to bring it to my attention. She strategized with her colleagues about how to talk about it with me. Um, and so I wanted to help myself out from 2 years or 3 years prior or longer. As I realized that, I was like, okay, how do I get off my high horse and how do I speak to men in a palatable way that's arguably what most of their wives are trying to say, but in a way that like invites them to the table. So I recognized that if I wanted more men to hear what I had to say, I had to call myself out first. I had to point out, here's where I added mental load for my wife. Here's where, I screwed up, and or I understand why she was really annoyed or upset with me. So the main one, that's at I think 22 million over the three main platforms. Um, I was talking about we had a little over a 1 year old, and
One,
she
one
just
point
made,
1.37 year old.
it's probably somewhere in the 1.3 range. Um,
I guess
we just
right.
made Alyssa had made some blueberry muffins, and I'd seen her take them out of the oven, and I think maybe just a couple minutes later, I said, "Hey, are these too hot to feed to our kid?" And I just kind of I role played being her for a second. Like, of course they're too hot. Like, you just saw me take them out of the oven. What are you talking about? Um, and it's just like one of those brainless moments where you're asking a question that you could have easily answered yourself if you had
Mm,
thought a little bit harder about it, or if you just like used your eyeballs. And I think part of the reason that this resonated with so many people is there are so many brainless questions that we're asking. We're asking our wives to be wife GPT. We're asking our wives to be Google for us. And so I think between that and one word that I think by now a lot of people have heard the word mental load at least once, probably in the world. A lot of people are also introduced to the word decision fatigue that day,
yes, I get that, man.
and I think a lot of people are like, oh, I didn't know there was a word for it. And so I think between decision fatigue, mental load, cognitive labor, those are new words. They're still new words for a lot of people, but that was that was a huge goal of mine, was to teach and explain what that looks like and why I was in the wrong by asking that question. And so that's a huge part of what a lot of my videos are, is I'll catch myself, I'll notice a moment like, oh, I didn't need to ask her that. I'm running out of material a little bit because I'm now catching myself and not making the same mistakes that I did a year ago. But um, that's what I try to do to help guys see it. Because I think if I were just saying, here's where you're adding extra mental load for your wife, and like I'm coming off kind of like an asshole, like I know better than you, you're not going to listen to me. And I think my goal is to help men lean in and see I'm screwing up too, and I coach this stuff.
I I love that approach of you don't necessarily have to be the guru. You can be the student, just a little bit ahead of your students.
Yep.
And but man, I wrote down wife GPT, decision fatigue, mental load, how it builds, probably resentment. And I get it, man. It's really funny. You're a lot younger than me. And but I literally just started learning that lesson of don't ask a question that you could easily find out the answer to. And I don't know why it just sort of I think it was because I started really listening to the room that my wife was in, meaning like listening to the voices that hit my wife's radar. And like I've got four boys, they're 8, 11, 17, 18, and every 7, 8 minutes, mom, mom, mommy, mama, hello, Lois, right? So that's what she hears and it's constant. And it's always like, where are my shoes? Where's my socks? Do you know where my toothpaste is at? Like, it's like literally. And here's the funny thing, man. Funny, not funny. I found myself asking those same ridiculous questions. And it was probably like a few weeks ago. I'm like, I think I can just go look for the peanut butter. I don't have to ask her where it's at. Like, that's just dumb. Like, and I started filtering just things that would rant. Like, and I would do this on automatic pilot. Like, I'd be like, hey, have you seen this? Or have you seen that? Have you seen this? Have you seen that? Whatever. Whatever. But I started filtering these things through. Do I need to ask her or can I just go find out for myself? Because the last thing she needs is another dude asking her where something is or asking mom or wife for something. But you know what I really would love for you to talk about is how this invisible labor, how decision fatigue, mental load, wife GPT, mom GPT, this can build resentment over
Mhm.
time. It can like literally be the one thing that like it basically, if it's a wife thing, it turns us into, I think she kind of views us as a man child, right? And here's the other opportunity that even just by talking to you, that's one of the reasons, man, why I love doing podcasts is that I feel like as we podcast, we learn. But like I honestly think one of the things that I could be better at, which I haven't really embraced this, but now that we're just talking about it, is I need to coach my kids and parent my kids of like, hey, before you ask your mother, like, is this something you can figure out on your own? Is this something you truly need help with? Or is it something you just don't want to go look for yourself? Right. And I think that that is a valuable lesson to teach,
Mhm.
especially a young man at a young age. So he's not doing that in relationships when he's older. But I would love for you to talk about like, because this builds resentment with women, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and for those just on audio, I turned my hat around. This is my wearing my recovering man
Yes.
child hat.
I saw you do that. I was like, I think he's either turning his hat around or he's having trouble seeing me that he's in the dark.
Um, but yeah, I think the huge reason that it does builders that, there's a handful of comments in those videos that's like, oh, what? I can't ask a question without her being
Oh
annoyed.
my God.
And I think if- so a handful of those guys are just kind of digging their heels in, like they feel like they should be able to ask those questions. I think what we're seeing a lot in society in general is that um, if we think it can be answered efficiently by us asking someone that might know better, that we think that from a utilitarian, like looking from above, we think that that's actually the more efficient thing. And that's where we're missing half the picture. So when we think about what decision fatigue is, and I know that there have been studies, I know I'm not going to cite it correctly, but I think it was so I worked at QuickBase, which is a software company that helps they call it deal with gray work, which is pretty much like moving things from your CRM to your spreadsheet to your, plugging it in manually into something else. And one of the stats they came up with, I think this is right, it's when you task switch, when you're on task, you go to answer an email and then you come back to the previous one. On average, people are losing like 15 minutes per switching of tasks. I know with my ADHD, like if I go to do one thing and then I go to do another, like the amount of time that's wasted if I had just waited till I was done with the first one, I'm going to save 15 minutes down the line. So coming back to those kind of thoughtless questions is that we are not looking at the big picture. So let's look at, in that blueberry muffins video, right? She was thinking she was doing something. Uh, Oftentimes she's on Facebook Marketplace, replacing things, buying things, selling things. Um, let's assume she was doing something like that. In the time that uh, I was asking that question, and any of those questions you had talked about, where are my shoes, where are my socks? Yeah, they might be able to come up with an answer quicker. They might be able to come up with an answer in 5 to 10 seconds. And we could also assume that if we're taking them off task, we're killing 15 minutes of their time by asking that question because now they have to task switch and then come back to it. I liken it to, I don't know if you're anything like me. I usually have like 15 to 20 tabs on my Chrome open at all times. Now, imagine you go to answer an email, and then your partner asks you, "Hey, um, could you grab me that information? What time's that thing on the schedule?" And then you go to look at another tab. And meanwhile, you have five Gmail tabs open. So then you're like, all right, I'll grab the information from this tab. All right, oh shoot, which tab was I on? And then you have to sift through multiple different tabs. For me, sometimes an hour will pass and I'll be like, what was I doing on my phone that I ended up scrolling Instagram for an hour?
Yeah.
And then I'll look up and they're like, oh, that's right. I was looking up this person's Instagram so that I could DM them instead of email them. Um, I think that the assumption of the 15 minutes lost is it's like hard to fathom sometimes, but when you break it down into like a Google Chrome situation, I think people get a better idea of it. So I think when we're trying to explain it to people, putting it in terms of where they get decision fatigue. I know
Yeah.
my Chrome tabs are a great source of fatigue and just navigating them all. I try to cut them down all the time, and they always pop back up.
I think that really hits home for us as guys because I think I mean I've heard that we have less gray matter between our brains, so like it's actually harder for us to go off task and then try to go back on. And I know for a lot of guys out there, like you throw them off their really important task and they're just they you might get your head bitten off. And it's very, very hard to switch gears. Like there are times where and the funny thing is I've tried to explain this to my wife, but I haven't been the most understanding as it, you know, as it pertains to her world. And what I mean by that is like I'll be in my office and I'll be on my phone or whatever. And granted, there are a lot of times where I'm on my phone, while she's talking, right? Which is a huge miss. And I'm definitely trying to be better with that. But there's a lot of times where like I'm in my office and I'm on my phone or I'm in the living room and nobody else is home and I'm trying to hammer out some things, but she's at the kitchen table. And as soon as she starts talking to me, like there's a part of me, I'm like, oh my God, like please, no, no, don't, no, no, don't. Like I'm like right in the middle. If I lose focus, I'm gonna lose the whole thing.
Mhm.
And it's agitating, right? And even like my kids, like last week, as you and I are recording this the week after Thanksgiving, even though this is going to release in the middle of December, and I literally was trying to squeeze 5 days of work into 2 days last week. And I was like, just felt like under the gun the entire day. And my kids
Mhm.
were off school and they kept coming in my office. And at one point, I looked at my oldest son, and it was like one after another, one after another, one after another. And I finally looked at my oldest son and I was like, I need you to give me like 10 minutes. I was like, if I get interrupted one more time, I am going to completely and totally lose focus on what I'm doing. And I've got deadlines and I've got to get this out. And if I don't, I told him, I was like, I'm not trying to be rude. I cannot have one more distraction right now. So can you, unless it's urgent, like if you need something, I get it. But if it's not, if you're just like coming in here and be like, hey, what's up? Shoot, like, give me 10 minutes. And he's like, okay, no, no, no problem. But like I would feel I think our wives probably feel like, and I know we do in our workday, it probably feels like that mental load, like they're walking into a room full of tasks, like, right? Like you walk into a room, you see the laundry over there, you, like kind of like how you describe the shoes over there, this over there, that over there, this or that, all this stuff, right? And then all the while, there's us and the kids who are tapping them on the shoulder, what it feels like, hey mom, hey mom, hey Jess, hey mom, hey Jess. And to them, it's probably like, I might have to hurt all of you people if you don't like, so I can understand that mental load. Is it just as easy for us to just number one, be aware of it? You know, like that's got to be the very first step. But number two is just simply taking ownership in the fact of like, hey, whatever it is I'm going to do, interrupt or ask, can I just do this myself or figure it out? Or like whatever I need to do to not necessarily interrupt like her flow.
Yeah. I would say, given most of our conditioning, it can be hard. I think when we get really used to asking somebody uh, a type of question over time, like it can be really hard to retrain yourself to not. One of the things that I've been retraining myself the past 2 years is whenever I see my wife on her phone and I'm about to say anything to her, I'll say, I'll wait for you to finish that. Um, I'd go ahead and assume she's doing something that requires a thought train. And sometimes you're like, nope, I'm just on Reddit. Sometimes it's nope, just on Instagram. And sometimes she's silent. And what I know that that means is that she is in the middle of something and she's not going to waste the capacity to even acknowledge what I said, but I know that she knows that I'm there and like ready to have some conversation or comment with her. Um, the one of the interesting things, a video that performed really well last year was someone had commented that they allowed their husband to ask 5 dumb questions a day. And the video performed really well because half the comments are like five's way too many, which I agree with. But I think the more important thing is that we're considering, is this one of my five? Is this a dumb question? Like, is this worth spending it? And I think when we're doing that, some benchmarks or recommendations I give to people is like if you can cite 3 ways you've tried to solve your problem before asking it, it's probably worth asking. So, honey, where are my keys? Um, if you were to say that versus you were to say, hey, honey, have you seen my keys? I checked the hook, I checked in the car, I checked the last 2 pant pockets that I've had. I don't see them, and I think you used the car last. I think that's a much more reasonable question than asking, "Hey, honey, where are the keys?" Um,
Because it's not
if
so
you're
generalized, you think?
that, well, part of it's that it's not open-ended and you're showing your work. Like, I'm not just
Okay.
asking you to borrow your brain. I've already done a little bit of research. Um, and these are my current findings. Because the first thing they're going to ask, well, did you check the key rack? Did you check your last pant pockets? So if you're already checking the places that you would expect to, most of the time you'll answer your question. You won't need to ask it, but in the rare case that you are still asking the question, they know that you're not just wasting their time. You might actually have some better insight than they do.
I think that's one of probably the most annoying things is that, like, I mean, even take somebody who works for you, right? And if they're asking you, like, at every turn, they're asking you for this or that or the other thing, you're like, wait a second, like, didn't I employ you so you could go, like, do some of this without me? Like, that's the
Yeah.
whole reason I hired you, right? But I can understand that. And I love I can definitely tell you're a math teacher. Show your work. I like it. Um, Tell me
Well,
about, yeah.
what's interesting is I often relate, when people are the huddles that you were talking about, I coach people to have those and I help them stay accountable for it. Um, I literally, when I'm having coaching sessions and I force them to write out an agenda for, I'll refer to it as their huddle. Um, is I'll say, okay, you're one of the bullet points you listed here is what are we doing for Thanksgiving? Or, what are we doing for Christmas presents this year? Um, if in How are you going to say that to your wife? And then they might say it aloud, what do you want to do for Christmas presents this year? I was like, okay, you recognize you're asking a completely open-ended question. They're going to have to go to their drawing board, go to their brain, and come up with a bunch of answers. Um, when I was a math teacher and I had honor students and I had the less challenging class. Literally the difference between those two tests, if I was teaching the same exact thing, it was just one was completely open-ended. You give them the least amount of stats and diagrams and information as possible, and they come to their conclusion. And then the easier class, you give them a multiple choice question. So that's how I like literally the difference between honors and we call it college prep was mental load. You give more mental load to your honor kids. So similarly, if you were coming to that conversation, I would say, hey, here's what I'm thinking we should get for our 10-year-old. Here's what I'm thinking we should get for our 3-year-old. I'm already thinking about how we want to go about Christmas this year. I've talked to my mom, and she wants to do gifts with over here, etc. So if you're coming to the table and you're presenting a bunch of things, versus just asking the open-ended question, you're taking mental load off of their plate. And I think it's valuable to talk about those things, but just asking the open-ended question is unnecessary.
Yeah, that makes total sense. It's like come to the table prepared, right? I mean,
Yeah.
even if you think about like if this was a job, right, and you were to have a meeting with your boss, not that your wife is your boss. I'm not saying that.
Mhm.
But what I'm saying is show up to these conversations prepared,
Yeah.
period. But if you go to your boss and you're like, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
What do you think we should do? Like, what are your ideas? Like, that's not what you're hired for. You're hired to actually bring solutions, to bring solutions to problems. You're there as a value add, not a value drain, right?
Yeah.
Um, I love that. What else do you coach men around?
So a huge
Like
part of
specifically with this and conversations.
Yeah, so a huge part of it is the fair play method. So sort of step one is just habit setting, creating your weekly huddle, finding what time of week works for you. I know families with young children can be really challenging to find a good time. Um, so first it's just figuring out the habit, what's actually going to work, what are you going to do long term. Second phase is we add emotional regulation and literacy. So in my community, I have them practicing the core motion wheels from connection codes. So they're practicing identifying shame, guilt, loneliness, anger, fear, sadness, hurt, and joy. And just being able to identify those things has helped me in the past year get way less defensive because usually what I'm doing is I'm guarding something that's vulnerable. But when I can identify it, it's way easier to regulate those emotions. Once we've got our habit, once we've gotten better at regulating our emotions and articulating them, then we start implementing the fair play method. And I think if we were to put it in like corporate talk, we're developing standard operating procedures for domestic labor. So if it were your sons, I might talk about in their huddle, hey, it's an issue that your bathroom is consistently like that. What do you think is a reasonable frequency for it to be clean? We know you're capable of cleaning because we see it when your girlfriends come over. Um, what what is a reasonable standard that you could do that we could count on? And let them come up with that answer. And if it's once a month or when my girlfriend comes over, be like, hey, you know what? Maybe you pay for a cleaning service so that we can have that clean because we would like to have a higher standard of that. If you don't want to pay for it, then I expect you to have a higher frequency. What would you be willing to barter? So that was just a not necessarily a real example, but having those standard operating procedure conversations is I think the hard part because it forces us to ask what's the why underneath. And I think that's a lot of times for people, a lot of guys, they're realizing how much of the domestic labor they don't do that they feel like they should, especially if they're like the head breadwinner, that a lot of them are feeling like I shouldn't have to contribute all this because I bring in all the money, which to my response is if your CRO or your head of sales were saying to the rest of the company, "Hey, I bring in all the money. I don't have to do any other work," to the CEO, and then the CEO is managing the COO, the HR, the success, customer success, everything else. Um, Most of us would disagree that the head of sales gets to get away with just bringing in the money and call themselves a co-founder. I realize I word saladed that last piece. Did that make sense?
It did make sense. Which I like. I like having conversations where, and I like having conversations in particular with my kids to bring them into the decision making matrix.
Mm,
So they have, I mean, because it's proven that if people, share what it is, like if they're going to say, yeah, I think an acceptable frequency is once a week. I'm absolutely willing to do that. When they can state that versus like, hey, you're going to do this every Saturday, whether you like it or not, period.
mm,
They might do it out of fear, but they're not the likelihood of that number one being sustainable and number two, them actually owning it is going to
mm,
be hard, right? Which we can pull that lever. We're their parents, but that's not the type of human being that we want to raise. We want to raise a human being who's self-motivated, self-starter, one who's going to take initiative, who's going to take action, not operate out of fear or even try to like scapegoat because they don't want to do it, right?
mm,
I really like that. For you've definitely have given us, I think, a lot of meat on the bone as far as this goes, as far as resentment and how, the invisible labor can really wreak havoc, I think. I mean, I see it. I gotta be honest, Zach, I see this all the time. I see this, and what I mean by that is where a marriage goes sour because of this. And the
mm,
way a woman tacks it up is you weren't there. Like you were just like you were physically there, but you weren't really there. Like, and they can't. Some just can't even really articulate it. They're just like you were checked out. Like
mm,
that. That's another way of describing it. You were just checked out. You weren't actually aware, checked in, right? And or autopilot, or kind of falling asleep at the wheel. I think a lot of these things that you're talking about, they're right there in front of us. We just have to choose to be very aware of them, and not fall into bad habits. Is it that easy, do you think?
yeah, I mean, I was definitely raised by a feminist. I feel like I went into our relationship and our marriage like wanting to be an equal partner. And I think even I still fell very much into this kind of man-child role. And I think it honestly, I know at least at my wedding and when we were engaged, a phrase I remember hearing a lot was happy wife, happy life,
I hate that.
which translated into action occurs to me um, as long as your wife is happy and you let her make the choices for her benefit, then you'll be happy. And what I think that turns into over time is the let turns into has to. She
Has to,
has to
yeah.
make the choices because you've conditioned yourself to thinking that she is the one that makes the choices. Um, and so I think over time that turns into a lack of ownership, similar to if there's two co-founders to a company and one of them wants to keep the other one happy and they make all the decisions at some point you could very easily get into a divot where that one person is making all the choices they don't want to, but it's like learned helplessness. So I think I felt like I went in with really good intentions, and I still ended up in a not great place. And I think a lot of our culture has that impact on us. I was lucky enough, I took 4 months of paternity leave because I was surrounded by two other teachers that did the same. And it was like, oh, you're having a baby. See you in like 3 4 months. Versus I know that if I had my sales job or if I had my one of my other jobs, I might not have been met with that same like expectation of, hey, see you back in 2 weeks. So I think the amount of friction we have to deal with to be equal partners, depending on the careers that we have, the families that we grew up in, the cultures, the state that we're living in, I think all those things are going to impact the level of equality that we're able to achieve and or the friction that we have to deal with to be the version we want to be.
I love that, man. Um, this has been really good, and I think this is a topic that needs to be front and center on our radar. Like this whole thing with invisible labor. I think it's something that um, doesn't hit our radar, unfortunately, until it's too late. And I
Mm,
and I think a lot of it too, it builds into resentment. But then we point back to like what happened. And I think a lot of it's just like, well, we just grew apart, or he just didn't pull his end of the weight, of the relationship, or he was checked out, or what. It's all these things that we point to that I don't know if necessarily like I think this is a big one. I really I think it's a relationship killer. It's a slow cancer that eats away at the relationship if not taken seriously. And I think one of the ways to you know I guess infuse some chemotherapy and get in front of this is to absolutely make sure that these things are on your radar, and to filter decisions and even questions for your wife, or even taking the leadership role through, can I take the lead on this, or can I do this without asking? Like when I say asking, like can I find such and such without asking her where it's at, just putting more things on her. The thing that really got my attention too is when we pull them off task, because I think we really understand what that feels like as men. And it's just like it can drive us crazy, especially if we're trying to be really focused on something or trying to get something accomplished. I
Mhm.
know, man, and I'm sure you probably agree with me. Days that I feel the most like the days that I point back and say that was not a good day. It always boils down to I there were so many things that came flying in my direction, and I just stopped whatever I was doing to tackle it. And then I look at my day and I'm like, oh, I was very reactive to a lot of things that came in, but I didn't get anything done that I wanted to.
Mhm.
And that usually that's the recipe for like today sucked.
Mhm.
And I think our wives, man, they deal with that. Like they deal with that. I mean, so do we, but I think we can do something about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, good stuff, man. Well, where can the men find you? So what is the I know you've got a massive social media following, but where can people find you?
Well, I would say so. This is going to air mid-December. So the past 3 months, I've been doing a free challenge. I think for a lot of people, back to my math teaching days, I realized how much teaching I was able to do just by grading papers and giving feedback. September, October, November, we did different challenges. One was identifying the mental load of your wife. Uh, October was identifying the mental load of the husbands. And then I stopped gendering it. Last month, I did identifying the emotional labor of your partner. December is identifying the mental load of your partner. And then January is going to be practicing the emotion wheel. Um, so I can give you a link for my mental load basics. It's a free school community where people can practice identifying these things. I think the people that won the last 2 months, was a $125 date night, and then there's a second and third place prize. They gained so much understanding of the invisible labor that each other were doing. Um, and they got to differentiate the difference between emotional labor, domestic labor, and cognitive labor.
So
So,
emotional labor, cognitive, you said cognitive labor,
yeah, cognitive labor is the equivalent of mental load.
mental load. Yeah. I love that, man. This is such a good topic, man, that yeah, I mean, no wonder you have the following you do, because it's fascinating. It's
Mm.
fascinating and insanely important. And a lot of people don't know how insanely important it is until it's too late. So this is one thing, man, that we can like go to the dentist and go get our oil changes, which means be proactive with it. Don't be reactive with it, right? And like have
Yeah.
this on your radar front and center. So guys, we're gonna have all the links in the show notes. So you won't have to look far. Head on over to dadedge.com/Friday 186 for the show. Again, the dadedge.com/186 for the Friday 186 for this show. Guys, just a quick reminder. This is our last Fierce Friday interview. So Zach, you're actually the last interview I'm doing on Fridays. How about that? We're going to end it off with you. How about
Hell
that?
yeah.
What I'm doing, guys, is that it's not going away, but I'm going to be doing solo shows from now on, starting next week. And solo shows meaning, we're going to be doing interviews like we always have been on Mondays. Wednesdays is going to be a member spotlight in their story, so we can help you guys through story. And then on Fridays, it's going to basically, I'm naming the show Fatherly Fumbles, First Downs, and Field Goals. So the things that we're screwing up, the things that we're moving the ball, a little bit down the field, we haven't scored yet, and then the points that we score on the board. So that's what we're gonna be doing, man. So yeah, I'm starting that next week. So you're my last Friday interview, dude, out of all these interviews. But I
Honored,
appreciate it.
honored to be the mic drop of the end of this specific era.
Dude, you sure were. Like if you guys can't, get some value out of today's podcast, man, I don't know what would because invisible
I would say
labor.
the field goal that people can take out of this one is I challenge you to use one of the words that you heard today that you've never used before and acknowledge your partner in what they're doing, whether it's their mental load, their cognitive labor, their emotional labor. Acknowledge them for something. Hey, honey, I appreciate the emotional labor you did talking to my mom about Christmas this year. Hey, honey, I appreciate the mental load you took on trying to figure out how the hell to get the kids to soccer practice and get their math homework done. Hey, honey, thank you for the domestic labor you put in on making sure that the cushions and everything were all set to go when my girlfriend came over.
Jessica, how are you? I appreciate all the mental load that you carry when dealing with all these children and dealing with all the things we have to do. And I also apologize for all the times I nudge you and ask you really dumb things like, where's the peanut butter? Where's my keys? Because that just takes you off track, doesn't it? She's laughing.
Adds to her decision fatigue.
Does that add to your decision fatigue? Does it add to your decision fatigue when everybody's like asking you crazy questions and you're just trying to get a few things done? And depends on her mood, she says. But I guarantee I'm going to go have a conversation with her tonight about this. And she's going to be like, oh my God, you finally get it. She's laughing. I'm married to such a great woman. Oh my God, she is so forgiving. The fact that I have a woman I've been married to for 21 years and she can laugh, be like, yeah, yeah, it's funny. And she later she's gonna be like, oh, that made a lot of sense. But dude, she takes it in stride. Like she is the best. Oh my God, God knew what he was doing. I was like, I'm gonna give you this one because you're such a disaster. Because she's the only one in the world that can take you. But no, seriously, Zach, thank you so much for coming on, dude. This is great.
Welcome.
All right,
Thanks for
brother.
having me.
You bet, brother. Take care.